Welcome back to Test Tuesday. Today we're looking at these god-awful spiral fittings. Welcome back. Okay, I'm gonna try my best to keep an open mind here, but these are the fittings that I see the most lying on the floor attached to someone's thing that they tried to put up on the wall and then it fell down. That's all I can say. But I don't want to have a go if these are like your favourite fittings and stuff. All I'm saying is I don't touch them with a barge pole. I just wouldn't risk it. There's many reasons why. I shall tell you towards the end of the video the main reasons why I don't like using these, and it's nothing really to do with the weight that they can withstand. There's lots of other reasons why I don't like using these. But let's keep it scientific. In the name of Test Tuesday, let's do a pull-out strength test on the plastic ones and on the metal ones. I'm using the Fischer nylon self-drill fixings PDN. Self-drill nylon fixings PDN comes with a 4.2 mil diameter screw. So not far off from the kind of screws that we're using on the grey plug test. Slightly, very slightly smaller, but pretty much, you know, in the same ballpark. It says on the packet, maximum 7 kilos. Well, we shall see. And the metal ones are self-drill metal fixings, exactly the same specs by the looks of it. 4.2 mil screw, maximum 7 kilos. Same as last time, I'm not going to talk you through the actual test because there's only so many times you can see a screw being pulled out of plasterboard before it starts to become a little bit boring. But I think the more interesting thing is going to be analysing the results afterwards and having a look at what these little things can actually withstand. And then I'll explain at the end of the video why, even if these do better on the strength pull-out test, I still personally wouldn't consider using them. And here are the results of our test. So once again, I've split it up into orangey colours for the nylon fittings and blue for the metal fixings this time. And you can see it's all much of a muchness really. We've got this slight anomaly here, and I just have to explain as well, all of the results were so bad that I ended up running an extra set of tests on the nylon and on the metal plugs. And on the fourth nylon test, it got this, I don't know if you would call it an anomaly, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. I'm including it in the results for now, but even that didn't do amazingly well. So just to put these results into perspective, I'll just show you in comparison to the little grey plasterboard plugs that we tested last time. So here was the result from last time. And you can see for the Quicksilver screw in the little LDF plastic plugs, you know, we're all hovering around, what, between 18-ish up to 24 kilos or thereabouts. That was the peak that we were looking at last time. We'll compare that to these results, ignoring this anomaly here, which I don't know whether or not we should even take that into consideration, but these are all hovering around absolute best about 13 kilos or thereabouts. Some of them down here, look at how low that one was. 8 kilos before that failed. Not great. So as before, what I've done is I've taken a rolling average over all of the results just to make the graph a bit easier on your eyes. So we've got the orange for the nylon and the blue for the metal. So you can see the nylon pretty much across the board did better than the metal for some reason. No idea why. I don't know if there's a slight difference in the shape of the screw thread thing that's on it. I don't know if that's very slightly different on the nylon, or I don't know. I can't explain why the nylon performed better than the metal, but it did. But there's not a lot in it. You know, we're getting a peak of 12.66 and a peak of 8.56 there, so not a massive difference between them, to be honest. The interesting thing is when we compare that to the average of the LDF fixing used with the Quicksilver. So in other words, this graph here. And if we overlay that graph over the top of our spiral fittings graph, check it out. So these results here are for the spiral fixing. These results here are for the little plastic LDF plug. Not only has it got a better peak result, but when it does fail, it's not a catastrophic failure. Whereas with the spiral plug, when it fails and it destroys the wall in the process. At least with the LDF one, when it goes, it then keeps on trying to grip onto the wall for dear life before it actually lets go completely. So that's probably a slight advantage for these as well. Even ignoring that, I mean, the peak result is almost double what the spiral fixings can handle. And then if we take a look at the actual results, some clever statistician can have a look at these and decide what standard deviations are and all that sort of thing. As I say, whether or not you would take this figure into account, I'm not sure. But coming out with an average of 12.9 kilos on the nylon fixing and 9.9 kilos on the metal fixing. There's very, very little in it. The interesting thing is when you compare that to the results of the little plastic LDF plug used with a little 6mm masonry bit, dead easy to use, and that's coming out 20.8 kilos was the average result on that from last time used with a Quicksilver screw, versus almost half the peak load capability of the spiral ones, 12.9 and 9.9 on average. So there you go, and that's one of many reasons why I don't like using those fittings. They're completely pointless. Let me run through a few other reasons why they're a bad idea. The absolute top reason, and I've said this before on a few videos, you should never drill into a plasterboard wall with anything metal and sharp unless you're 100% sure that there's no pipes or cables behind it. These metal versions of the fitting are really, really sharp on the tips. They will easily go through a pipe, no problem, and definitely straight through an electric cable without hesitation. And you wouldn't know because you haven't done any kind of investigative hole first, because these are promoted as a non-drilling fixing and saying that you can go straight into the wall without drilling. Okay, you could pilot hole the wall first and then go in. I still don't think it's a good idea. You'll probably just make the fixing even weaker than it was to start with. So personally, I wouldn't particularly advise it. The plastic, if you are going to use them, I would suggest you use a nylon one because they're less likely to cause damage to pipes. Still probably happily eat into an electric cable. But as I've always said, if you're drilling into plasterboard walls, use a blunt masonry bit, because you can really feel when you're drilling in. If you're drilling carefully, you can feel if you're hitting anything, and you can stop before you've caused any damage. I've made a video all about finding stuff in walls. I'll link to it below, or I'll link to it up above, wherever. I'll link to it somehow. The other thing with these, I mean, there's not even a cost advantage. They're really expensive for what they are. If you compare them to the little plastic plugs that I have showed you on the channel a few times, they cost about 5p each. And these, you'll be paying up to 50p each, maybe even more for these. I mean, if you buy them in bulk, you can probably get them down to about 10p each, but they're still at least double the price of the plastic ones. So there's no cost advantage of getting the spiral fittings. They're not faster to use because you've got to use a Phillips bit, really, to put them in. I mean, you can probably get away with a posi drive bit, but bear in mind, you're going to be using a posi drive bit for putting the screw in, but you're going to have a Phillips for putting the fixing itself into the wall, because a posi drive doesn't particularly fit the fitting very well. And I don't think they're any faster to put in than these. In fact, if anything, if you're doing a lot of these, you can drill the wall and hammer in plastic plugs way quicker than you can screwdriver these in by hand. And I would highly recommend not using an electric drill to put them in, because as we've seen from the tests, if you over tighten them in the slightest, it chews up the plasterboard and makes them even weaker than they were to start with. So yeah, not great. The other thing is, when you've put a screw into the fitting, it's very hard to get that screw back out without it taking the entire fitting with it. Whereas with a normal plastic fitting like one of these, you can happily drive a screw in and take it out and do that over and over, and you can reuse these probably 5 or 10 times without it causing too much of a problem. Not a chance with these. Once you've put a screw in, it's staying in. And once you take the screw out, if it takes the fitting out with it, that hole is unusable. You can't then screw that back in because the plasterboard behind it is gone. The other thing as well with the little plastic fittings, you can put pretty much any type of screw in those and it'll just work. And you'll be able to put a big screw in and take it out and then swap it for a smaller screw, you know, classic situation where you're putting a mirror up or something like that and you find out that the screw head doesn't fit through the little keyhole slot on the mirror bracket and you end up having to swap it for a smaller screw. Absolutely fine with these. With these, you're pretty much stuck using the screw that came with it. And even if you don't, you're going to have to build up a separate range of screws that you are comfortable will work with the spiral fittings. Because the 10 gauge screws that I would happily use with pretty much any red plug or any grey plasterboard plug, can't use that with these, no chance. So stick with the supplied screws, which are normally pan head. So if you need a countersunk screw, you're going to have to do a bit of your own R&D on that front. And the other thing is, we're briefly touched on when we're looking at the graphs. When they fail, they fail. It's a catastrophic failure. There's no kind of half pulling out and then it still grips the wall a little bit and all that sort of thing. When they go, and that's it, gone. So if you've got a shelf or a mirror or something like that on these, it's probably not just going to half fall out the wall. It's probably just going to come clattering down and it'll be catastrophic failure of the plasterboard itself. And then finally, when they do fall out the wall, and I guarantee you they will fall out the wall because I spent a good 5 years going around and fixing the damage caused by these. You'll just have to trust us on that. When you see the amount of these just lying on the floor attached to a shelf bracket, you know, you start to realise how completely useless they are. I mean, you do get people using them in ridiculously inappropriate situations. I did see in a commercial building where someone attached a basin to a wall, like a vanity basin, using these, and no massive surprise that came clattering off the wall. But when they do come out, they destroy the wall. You can't reuse the hole that it's come out of. If you compare the tiny little hole that you get from the plastic plug versus the catastrophic damage that you get from these when they pull out the wall, you're looking at a whole different ballgame for repairing the wall afterwards, because it removes so much material. They don't have a lot going for them, I'm afraid. All I would say is use them as an absolute last resort. But even then, I would probably just say, attach stuff to the wall with chewing gum or something before using these, because they're awful things. I don't understand what you would even use them for, because they're really overkill for like a picture or mirror or something like that. And they're not strong enough to hold anything bigger than that on the wall. So just my humble opinion. If you're happy using them, fill your boots. But personally, I would advise against it based on my experience. I hope you found that useful, and I hope you don't have any major disasters with these if you've already used them. Hopefully you've got enough information from that to make an informed decision for whether or not you're going to use these in the future. Thank you once again for watching. If you're new to the channel, I do these Test Tuesday videos, not every Tuesday, but every now and then. And we put a few common or garden joinery products through their paces and see what they can withstand. Always remember, go off the manufacturer's recommended load ratings. You always have to take a safety factor into account, but always follow what the manufacturer recommends on their instructions. And I'm not having a go at Fischer, because Fischer do make good products, but personally, I would say just ditch these. Thanks again for watching. See you next time. Bye.